people will join. Is that okay, Sanallah? Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulullah. Good evening, colleagues. On behalf of the Deanship of Academic Development, I would like to welcome you, warm welcome to that activities. Tonight, activities on enhancing student engagement, a topic that, as you know, is very important. And we are pleased to have with us Professor Mrs. Ohland from Purdue University. Matthew is the professor in the School of Engineering Education at Purdue University. Matthew has a very impressive long list of achievements during his academic career. I'm sure you have read it. We did post a brief of it. And being a professor at Purdue University, that by itself says a lot. We would like really to spend as much time as we can with Matthew. And with this, I will leave the floor for you, Matthew. It's all yours now.
Thank you, Dr. Saeed. Let me share my slides. Hold on. Welcome. The workshop will be sort of in two parts, and let me get to the chat window again. I need to provide a link to a worksheet that we'll be using in this first part. That link will take you to a Word document, and I'll ask Sanala as the co-host to, as new people arrive, to let them have that link as well. I know that it's late your time, but the workshop, as the point of this is partly thinking about student engagement, I'd like to make sure you stay engaged as well. So the worksheet is intended to be a space for you to put down ideas and thoughts that you can consider in your teaching after the workshop. The workshop doesn't do much good if you don't actually make use of anything that you learn of here or think of here. So the objectives of this first part will be, I'll just briefly define active learning with your help. We'll develop some plans to adopt some active learning in class and list common faculty concerns about using active learning and address those. And then in the second part, we'll talk more specifically about some strategies to motivate students. I know that you are planning to be face-to-face, just as Purdue is this coming term, but the good news is, because we've been through more than a year of with a lot of teaching in an online environment, and there is the potential that we will again need to be prepared to teach in an online environment, either in the near future or in some distant time. Many of the things we're discussing will work just fine in an online environment, and in some cases, they'll work better. So there are some opportunities to reflect on how these techniques work in an online environment, and some of the in the worksheet there are actually some suggestions for how that works. So let me proceed. In the chat window, if you would, post your definition of active learning. Learning by doing, thank you. Other definitions? All working and sharing ideas. Student engagement, all right. When the students are active. Autonomous. So there's no uniform definition of active learning, but there are two important parts to it. So the first part is that, right, things that students do in class, right? So of course, they're active when they do things related to your class outside of class, because that's not a time when they could be listening to you talking, right? So we're focusing on any kind of in-class time, whether it's face-to-face or virtual, when students are doing something other than listening and taking notes. So even though taking notes is doing something, they're essentially, they could be just copying down what you say verbatim or as close to it as they can. So those are the two important components of active learning, right? Is activity and, importantly, engagement or learning. So work with me for a moment. I know we've just started, but take a stretch break. You don't have to turn your cameras on if you don't want to. I know that, again, I know that it's late where you are, and so many of you are probably in your homes, but I'll take a stretch, all right? And so the question is, all right, so we're here learning about active learning. Is stretching an example of active learning? In this case, in the workshop. And you can use the yes, no buttons to vote. If you have a newer version of Zoom, those are located in your reactions. And if you have an older version of Zoom, they're in the participant window. Or you could put the answer in the chat. I see a variety of answers, including in a yoga class. Excellent. Great. So the most popular answer is E. If we were in a yoga class, it could definitely be active learning, but it's not focused on the learning objectives that we have for this workshop, right? So it doesn't really fit that definition of active learning, because again, the focus is on something that's active, that's focused on the learning of that you're trying to achieve. And so active learning is no one thing, which is fortunate, right? Because different folks who are here in the workshop will be comfortable with different types of approaches. So that continuum goes from instructor-focused activities, many of which are hardly disruptive of any kind of teaching style that you might have currently. So even someone who has been very, very focused on lecture in their teaching can insert some small activities and make a difference with very little disruption to the way that they've taught for years. And then at the other end of the spectrum are much more disruptive approaches like problem-based learning, where the problem drives the course. It requires a tremendous amount of preparation ahead of time, and is very difficult to do properly without quite a bit of practice. And so that's a very wide spectrum on that continuum. And so these over at this end are what we would say are instructor focused, and the ones at the other end are student focused. So again, with your yes, no buttons, and again, if you have a newer version of Zoom, these will be in the reactions tab. So the question here is, are student-focused strategies, the ones that were on the right, are they better than the less student-focused ones that were on the left of the picture? Let me clear the previous responses. There we go. If you already clicked a response, go ahead and click it again. Oh, so the yes, no buttons are, again, they're in the participant window if you have an older version of Zoom. And then if you have a newer version, there's reactions at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. So I have a number of yeses, and especially with the reactions buttons, I have a thumbs up, I have one no, and I have one speed up, which I will tell you I rarely get that recommendation. So I'm wondering if I got if someone's clicking that by mistake. But let's go ahead and move on. So the good news is that methods across the entire spectrum can be effective. So you don't need to be focused on those more student-focused ones, which again, some of those can be very complicated and time-consuming. Even the ones that are not particularly disruptive can be very effective. So again, the focus here is right. The two elements are that it is active, not passive, and that there's interaction when you want active student engagement. So this is one step more than simply active learning, because now I'm going to add in the element of interacting with other students or with the instructor. It's also possible, and I'll talk about 3 actually, because it is possible to focus on interaction with content as well. So here's a high level strategy, right? Which is student-student interactions. And again, they don't need to be complex. They just need to be where 2 students or more interact directly. So some strategies there would be the use of discussion boards or peer review of student work, students answering a question together in a team. So there are multiple methods available that are student-student interactions. And all of those have that special character that students actually have a live interaction with other students. So then student-teacher interactions would include things like a live question and answer session, including possibly in a virtual environment. We can use online polls with feedback, and I use polls by a computer even when I teach live classes. Those can be very useful feedback mechanisms because they can be done anonymously, where students aren't afraid to tell you what they're really thinking. And then again, a discussion board is a place where the instructor, the teacher, can interact with the students in a very positive way. But then it's also possible to have student content interactions, and those are also important, and they represent an active method, but they lack that interactive component of working with another human being, which is important, which we'll talk about in a bit more. But student content interactions might include a tutorial, an online simulation, or practice tests with solutions. So these are ones you can see how these are different from simply watching a recorded video, because they're interactive, where the student is doing something, but they're also getting feedback from that interaction. So which method is best, right? So I'd like you to spend some time thinking about how to pick a method for your course. And again, I'm prepared to have you think about this in an online environment, because there is the risk that we will have to do that again. But of course, much of this is easier to do in a face-to-face environment. So how do you choose? So the first important consideration is what you're trying to achieve, your objectives. And so you'll know what those are. And as you consider what methods to adopt, make sure that they fit with your objectives. The second important consideration is that some modes of active engagement are better than others. And so I'm going to focus on a framework here, which was developed by Mickey Chi from Arizona State and a collaborator, Wiley. And I've written it as, I mean, I refer to this as the ICAP model, but what's shown there is that I is better than C, and C is better than A, and A is better than P. So let me talk about what those different letters stand for. So P stands for passive. So a student watching a video is passive. They can't speak back to the video and get a response. It doesn't mean that they can't learn from that, right? That's and I use pre-recorded videos for some of my instruction in a flipped classroom model. But that's so that I can get to better interaction when I'm live with my students. But I recognize that that form of interaction, the student content interaction that represents, it tends to be low on as far as an effective teaching tool. So in this model, active learning has a very specific and narrower definition. And what it is, it represents the bare minimum of what it means to be active. And that is that in this case, the student is doing something other than simply listening. But it lacks the components that are in the later ones. So in this case, if the student pauses that video and copies notes, right? Now they're doing something other than simply watching. It's still not terribly effective, but it's better than if they just watch the video without even processing it with their own notes. Constructive requires that the student be creating their own understanding. And so it obviously, since that's one of the things that's one definition of learning, right, is the making of meaning, that is much better than the other two. So if a student summarizes those notes, they have to process that information, and it results in better learning. But we're still lacking that final level, and in here, interactive means interacting with other human beings, with other people. And so here, if we ask student pairs or more to come to consensus, to agree on a summary of those notes or a concept, it's even more effective. So the most effective methods are interactive. And so this is, of course, why also personal tutoring is very effective, right? Because it involves that same level of interaction. And in that case, it's interaction with an expert. But we can't always be there, right, to be that tutor. And so most of our interaction will be structured around having students interact with students, which has other benefits, right? Because they establish those peer relationships, which will be prominent in their future careers. So quality then is a consideration. So in the worksheet, and we'll get that link again if there are new people that have joined us. Here's that link. So if you haven't already downloaded that worksheet, please do. In that worksheet, there is a place to evaluate all of those activities. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you in breakout rooms to discuss with the other people here so that you can try to come to an agreement on how each of those things is rated. Does anyone have any questions about what I would like you to do in that worksheet for activity 4? I'm watching either for hands or for anything in the chat. Or you can unmute and ask any questions. All right, I think everyone is ready. I'm going to go ahead and open the breakout rooms then.
We are moved to main session.
All right, welcome back. So I hope you had enough time to come to an agreement on each of these. So in the chat, so watching the professor do a demonstration, if you would, in the chat window, you can put a letter. Is that passive, active, constructive, or interactive? Very good. Wow. Okay. There's a lot of agreement. A lot of times that one is particularly confusing for people because right, for the professor, it's active. But for the students, they're just watching. Great. All right. How about taking notes? Is that passive, active, constructive, or interactive? All right, so I see a lot of A's, but I also see some C's. Right, and it does sort of depend if the students are taking notes, and while they're taking notes, they're summarizing. It could be constructive, but most of the time, students don't have time to process while they're taking notes. In which case, it's simply active. Highlighting text while studying, what about that one? Is that passive, active, constructive, or interactive? Okay, generally seems like people agree that it's at the minimum, it's active because they're not creating new knowledge, right? If they're making a lot of decisions on what's important, it starts to drift over toward constructive. How about answering a question posed by the professor? Well, there's a variety of responses on that one. So until the professor gives feedback, it's only constructive, right? It's not interactive yet. If it becomes more of a conversation between the professor and the student, then it would become interactive. And then finally, a think, pair, share activity, which is an activity. There's a clearer definition later in that worksheet. But this is where, right, two students are asked to think about an answer, pair it with each other, and share once they come to an agreement. And it looks like very much everyone thinks that that's interactive. Yeah. Right. So anything that's interactive is, of course, also constructive and active. Right. So when I see an answer like I and A and C, yes, it absolutely, right. Those absolutely go together in that way. Great. So it seems like you understand that that rating system well, which is good because that helps you make decisions about which activities will have the greatest impact in your class. So again, keeping in mind that there's the potential for us to have to go back to some online teaching. Some methods work better online, right? I mean, we hear a lot about instructors who are frustrated by how the things that are lost when we move to online teaching. But in a live discussion, only small numbers of students can participate. But with a discussion board, everyone can post, and in fact, they can interact within the discussion board, but without interrupting each other. In a live discussion, there's little time for reflection, right? The people who would like to stop and think have a challenge reflecting because there are other people are talking while they're trying to think. But in a discussion board, a student can reflect on a particular response for as long as they want to before they respond. And then finally, in a live discussion, it's very easy for certain people to dominate the conversation. But in a discussion board, right, posts are posted as complete thoughts. And even though people might be typing at the same time, it's only when someone submits to the board, it submits their entire thought without anyone else's thoughts in between. So it's very effective in an online environment. And as is the case with some of the other methods we'll talk about, there's in fact no loss, but in fact potentially a gain from working in an online environment. So what are some simple ways, right? So for people who are trying to get started with this, for people who are particularly concerned about the time that it might take, here are some simple methods. And again, at the bottom of the worksheet, there's a list of lots of different kinds of activities and a definition of what those might look like. A minute paper is simply asking students to take 1 minute to write down the answer to something. And that might be what was the main point of today's class. It might be what was the most confusing point about today's class, and so forth, right? So it might be a way of getting some really good feedback, but having students reflect about what's happening in class. So it's focused on the learning, and it's active, and it's constructive because they're generating that. And then it can become a bit more interactive by the professor responding to those minute papers, but you don't need to respond to all of them. When I do this kind of assignment, I review enough so that I have a general sense of what students are answering, and then that's what I talk about in the next class. A lot of instructors, a lot of professors say that they love to teach creativity and critical thinking. But very few actually do that when you actually look at their teaching practices. So to actually teach creative thinking, you ask students to brainstorm possible answers to an open-ended problem. And there are lots of ways to go about that. But then if you ask students to, so that's creative thinking. But then if you ask students to critique and identify the most promising, then that's critical thinking. So you can actually ask simple questions that generate creative and critical thinking without having to do anything too complicated. Even asking students to summarize the big ideas from the last part of class or for the last unit, right, and even at the beginning of a semester, beginning of a term, to ask students to summarize the big ideas from another class could be useful. But of course, asking them to support whatever ideas they come up with some details, right? Again, to make them reflect and construct. So these all work face-to-face, but as you can see, right, these are easy to adapt rather to an online environment if you need to. And even to be adapted to asynchronous classes, where if there's a complete disconnect in time. I know in my classes, some of our students had a very difficult time when they were remote because they were in very different time zones from mine. And so some students, it was very helpful to do some of the activities that could be adapted asynchronously for students who really had a hard time being present physically during regular class time. So I'm going to put you back in groups to generate 3 specific exercises to make your class more active. Now, I want you to focus on what we've been talking about. There's a table in the worksheet, and of course, your own imagination. I'd love for you to think of new ways to do things that are interactive, constructive, active. It's easy to think of a lot of passive things, but let's focus on the other ones, all right? If you, let me post or paste that worksheet in again, make sure everyone has it. I don't know if the same people are here. Again, do you have any questions about what I'd like you to do?
So you are referring to table 1 in the activity sheet?
Right, so table 1 has a list of activities along with a sort of a guess as to where they fit on the ICAP system. And then table 2 has some definitions of different kinds of activities. So you might find that helpful as well, because some of the activities referred to, they might be ones that you're not as familiar with. And so there's, in addition to table 1 and 2, there's a place for you to think about how you might work with those yourself in your own classes. Great. So don't forget, talk to the other people in your breakout group, especially to think of new ways that you might be able to to do things, right? If you have new ideas, please share. It looks like my breakout rooms are ready. Actually, let me recreate them because we've got some people moving around. All right. I'm going to open those rooms now. I'll give you a bit more time here because you need to think about how to make this fit with your teaching style and with your class or classes. And then when you come back, if you're still not sure how to make something work in your class, we'll have a conversation about that. Here we go. Hamed, did you leave your breakout group on purpose? Greetings. Did you leave your breakout group on purpose?
Yes, Dr. Matthew. No, I don't leave it in purpose because I wasn't here for the last 5 minutes, so I don't know what to talk about it, please.
So you should, at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to join. You are assigned to a breakout group, and you should be able to rejoin.
Okay, I rejoined them, but I don't have anything to talk about it. Okay, no problem.
So then, Hamed, if you want to work here, so do you have the worksheet open? right, and Hossein, are you there? Hi, Bashir, are you done in your breakout group? All right, welcome back. So as you come back, if you would, in the chat window, report your favorite strategy. Especially something if you've thought up a new way of creating interaction in your class, I'd love to hear about it. Min project, a 1-minute journal in a small group, nice. Problems with no clear answer, always exciting. Yeah, give students a reason to work together, right? Oh yeah, using WhatsApp. Excellent. Case-based problems, very effective, especially in certain fields of engineering. More commonly used in fields like civil. Excellent. All right, some great ideas appearing there. And certainly keep adding ideas there. Oh, the jigsaw method is a little bit. It takes a little bit more time to set up, but it's very useful when done correctly. It creates a lot of interdependence among students. Great. So let me just address some common concerns, right? So the first one is the concern for preparation time, right? And admittedly, some methods take much more preparation time. Like Jigsaw takes more preparation time than a lot of think, pair, share activities. But the important point is, right, that they don't all take a lot of time. So, and then the other question is, right, can I still cover the syllabus, right? The concern for content being lost. So they often take very little time to prepare. I tend to use a lot of simple active learning supplemented by some more complex active learning. But the simple ones I use all the time. And in some cases, I add them to my class even when I wasn't planning to, because they add well to what I'm trying to teach on that day, based on what I'm seeing the students how they understand what I'm teaching. And can I still cover the syllabus? And the answer is, of course, yes. We have a long list of learning objectives in my classes, but the important question is what the students are learning. So I have to do some of this interactive active learning in order to make sure that they're actually learning something. So I'm mindful that we should probably take a break in the next 10 minutes. So what I do want to make sure is, if you have any concerns other than those two, right, which are very common again, right? But if you have any other concerns, I want to make sure that I hear those. So there's a place to write those down in the worksheet, but certainly either raise your hand and unmute or put in the chat any questions that you have about unaddressed concerns, right? Anything else that you're worried about in adopting active methods in your classroom. I see Talal's hand is up. Go ahead, Talal. If you're there, Talal, you can either unmute or you can put a question in the chat. So I just received a direct message of like, how, let's see, let me paste this question so everyone can see it. Right, so how can a more theoretical or literature course be more interactive? So a literature course can be a wonderful place for discussion sorts of groups. Again, whether it's in person or online. Typically, those kinds of interactive methods are actually not only easier to adopt, but they're much more common in that area. It's really in courses that focus on things like engineering and science, where a lot of instructors tend to be more reluctant. How can we make another question I got from someone is, how can we make a TOEFL session more interactive? Hold on. So let me get that there. Anything focused on language, right? It's a wonderful opportunity to have students speak to other students, and right in that new language. So for you, right, obviously this is your students learning English. I remember that your students have sort of an intensive first year experience where they focus on their English skills. And so it's natural to have students engaging in another language with each other for in an interactive way. Okay, so here's a concern that just came through, is if students don't want to learn, but they're only interested in grades. So it's absolutely appropriate to expect participation from students and to have it affect their grades if they don't participate. And so for example, by collecting some kind of product that comes out of that interactive engagement, you can identify whether students are participating or not. But that is an important question for sure. I have another question. Does active learning work for all students? So the research is consistent that on average it's better. Some students, especially students who are neurodiverse, may have a strong preference not to interact with other people, right? It doesn't mean that they don't learn better that way. It just means that they don't like it. But that's different, right? What students like is important to me, but it's not as important to me as whether they're learning. So I haven't seen research specifically on populations of students who don't enjoy active learning, because go ahead, Yasser. So I haven't seen research specifically on students like that, but in general, all students will benefit, and there's really no downside. I'm trying to make sure that I got to all the questions. I think I did. New questions coming in. So regarding the TOEFL question, right, how can you make students who feel their English is not good enough to interact, right? So all students will need, and we'll talk about that more in the next section of the workshop, because it's important for students to feel competent to do what you ask them to do. And I would suggest building complexity slowly. So for example, asking students to have very simple conversations to begin, and to start to become more comfortable interacting in English with the other people in the class before they engage in more complicated conversations. Again, all good questions. The question: shall we give less weights in interactive classes? I certainly don't. You need your grading, your marks should be consistent with your objectives. And so if you, and it's fair to have the marks really focus on the content, knowing that some of that content is being learned in an interactive environment. The students should learn better. And I see other folks. Right. So we'll talk more about the motivation issue in the next part of the workshop. Let's take a break, because we already had some people that needed to leave and take a break. So let's see. It's 2:23 my time, which means it's 9:23 your time. So take a break. Yep. Until 9:33 p.m. So I'll encourage you to get away from your computer. Just take 10 minutes, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. So I'll mute, and I'll actually stop my video as well, but I'll stay in case people have more questions in the chat. Sanala, did you want to thanks starting the recording again? All right. So to summarize that first part, right? Active student engagement improves learning outcomes in courses generally, but even in online courses. We need to focus on those interactions that increase connection, especially if we end up online again. Using feedback is a very important way of having two-way interaction between instructor and student. But student engagement also is proven to increase motivation, retention, and learning. So there's really no negative here. But I'm going to focus in the second half more specifically on motivation. So again, summarizing that first part, that there are lots of different ways of going about student-student, student-teacher, and student content interactions. So that allows you to make choices based on both your objectives and your teaching preferences. But in doing so, you should always consider quality of interaction, right? Making sure that you have the activities that will promote the best learning. And then finally, if you're just starting out, absolutely, I would recommend to keep it simple. The more complex methods, some of them take some time to become proficient at, which makes it hard to focus on everything else that you're trying to do teaching while you're learning a new approach. So start simple for sure. So let me move into the second half here, where I'd like to focus more specifically on student learning from a motivational standpoint. Research is clear that students who are more motivated are going to learn more. And so in this part of the workshop, I'm going to focus on these two things, right? I'll describe the important aspects of motivation, but also identifying approaches to motivating students. And as with the first half, a lot of these approaches will work in an online environment. I need to get a different worksheet for you because I'd like to do this a different way. Partly because it's useful, and partly because you can actually consider using a technique like this with your own students. So hold on. So here's a new link. So that link is to a Google Doc, which will allow for collaborative editing. And I see people joining it, which is great. More people joining. I see the number going up, which is good. So, and I'll have to I'll paste that again as people come on and off of the Zoom call. I'll get to that into that Google Doc in a minute, and I'll tell you how to use it as well. Motivation matters. Motivation does improve learning. It also makes it more fun for the students and the instructors. But the most important thing is that motivation is not a fixed trait. So it's not that students either are or are not motivated. We can actually do things that make things more motivating for students. And so there's a reference there at the bottom if you're interested in learning more about motivation. That reference is focused on the college classroom. It's by Marilis Vinicki, and it's an excellent resource. It also has a lot of information about different learning theories. I just wanted to start out, since I know you've been teaching. I looked at the KFUPM website, and it seems like you've been teaching completely virtually for an entire year now, at least. So I wanted to ask, what did you find different about motivating students in an online environment? And so you can either raise your hand, or you can put something in the chat window that you noticed that was different. right, we couldn't see students' faces. Yeah, I mean, and I asked my students to share their video when they were able to, but some students couldn't. No feedback, right? There's a lot of loss of feedback that that we had to face during the online time. Difficult to get their focus, right? Because we lost complete control of the learning environment, right? They were in some environment, but we didn't know what that environment looked like for them. Right. Right. We completely lost that ability to look around the room and to see what the students were doing. It just made it a lot harder, right? So, I mean, so that tells you something about those things that are important in motivation, right? There's been research on what students were experiencing, right? That loss of visual cues, both for the students and for the instructors. Students were affected by that loss of community, right? And for some of them, it specifically affected external motivation. For some students, it's very motivating to want to learn, to be able to share with other people, and especially when you're on a team with other people, right, where their learning actually is affected by your learning. It became very important to have that kind of connection. And another thing that students reported was they lost the ability to just ask even just short questions where if they didn't understand something the instructor said, either conceptually they didn't understand it, or even that they didn't hear it correctly. That loss was significant, right? Because sometimes students can ask quietly, they can ask questions to people sitting next to them, but they lost that ability in the environment that was fully electronic. But on the other hand, it did provide some opportunities to connect with students in new ways, and so it wasn't a total loss. So let's focus on more broadly. This is a model of motivation, and it describes three very important aspects of motivation, each of which we'll talk about separately. The first is competence, whether students can do what you're asking them to do. The second is autonomy, whether they have some freedom of choice, and relatedness, whether the extent to which students engage with other people to do what you're asking them to do. So you can see why interactive activities that put students working with other students would especially open-ended ones, right, would tend to be very motivating, because it would tend to address relatedness and autonomy. And if you make sure that the students have the right preparation to do them, it would also address competence. But let's talk about these individually. And again, I'm going to post the link to the Google Doc for those that might not have gotten it. So that link, it goes to a Google Doc where for each of those particular aspects of motivation, what I want to do is to have you go into breakout groups, and in that Google Doc, there are suggestions of some things that you can do to promote each of those. And the technique that we'll use, it's what's called start, stop, and continue. But really, it really begins with continue, which is to think about what you already do in your teaching that supports that aspect of motivation. And to commit to continuing to do that. But then to identify ideas that you should start. And those ideas might be some of the ideas that are in the Google Doc as suggestions. But of course, I look forward to seeing things that you make up on your own, right? Either that you think of or that you hear in discussion with the people in your breakout group. and then as you add those ideas into the Google Doc, here's a benefit of using the Google Doc is I can compile those responses and I can just share the Google Doc at the end. So it also means that all of the people in a breakout group can all be typing at the same time. So you don't need to wait for other people to think of, to finish talking before you can type. So that's the technique we'll use, is that start, stop, and continue. Let me talk more about the Google Doc. So I've already pasted the link to the Google Doc. Let me see how many people are connected now. Okay, so now we have 36 people, it looks like, connected, so we're getting there. So using the Google Doc has benefits that I've just mentioned, right? It can be collaboratively edited. It can be shared with everyone. So I can share not just your group's discussion, right? Not just your group's ideas, but I can share everyone's ideas with all of the people attending the workshop. So you can look through other people's ideas, ideas that came out of other groups, to see if anything there sparks your interest as something that would be useful to you to do in your class. So the next thing is that the way that Google Doc works, and actually let me, I'm sharing my screen, so let me show you how it works. So here is the document. I'm waiting for it to redraw. There we go. So hold on just a moment, I'm still zooming in. It's taking a while to redraw, but I think we're there. All right, so what you can see, oh, it went too big. Hold on. There we go. So at the top of the document is just a description of what the document is, but then there's a block of numbers. And so if you are in breakout group 5, when you click on this 05, it lets you jump to a section of the document where you'll be working. So there's a place to list the members of your breakout group. And then you see how there's a section here on competence that we'll talk about in a moment. Then there are some suggestions for things that might be useful. And then there's a place for you to write in things that you're interested in doing. And again, it could be, those ideas could be based on the ones above, but they also could be ones that come up in discussion in your breakout group. So let me take that back down again. So then the next thing you need to know is, how do I know what breakout group I'm in? So the window of your Zoom application, the title of the window at the top left will indicate what breakout room you're in. But you only see that if you exit full screen. Now, here's the good news, is only one person in the room needs to know what the number is, and they can tell the other people in the room. And actually your breakout rooms your breakout groups will be larger because there are so many of you. So there'll be 5 people together, but that's okay. I'd like, for some people have a hard time thinking and typing at the same time. And so, especially if they need to share their ideas. So I'll encourage you, even if this person isn't the only person who is typing, I do want you to identify a reporter so that when you come back to the main room, the reporter will be the one who shares some ideas that came up in their breakout group. All right, so now let me go back to what it is that we're doing when we get to our breakout groups. So competence is focused on students having the knowledge, skills, and abilities to do whatever it is you ask them to do. But it's also important that they have confidence, that they be confident that they can do those things. There are various questions to think about in that context that I've included here, right? So how do you make sure students can do what you ask them to do? How do you build their confidence? And then on the things to stop doing would be anything that you know that professors do that tends to make students lose confidence. And again, there are some ideas about what those might be in the Google Doc. So let me talk about the categories of suggestions. So there are 4 different groups of suggestions in the Google Doc. One is about monitoring student learning. Next is for adjusting for time and technology, especially if you're in an online environment. The next is giving opportunity for low stakes feedback. So feedback that doesn't necessarily affect a student's grade or doesn't affect it very much. And then ideas for providing more structure, especially critical for students who are earlier in their education that need more structure. So the suggestions are in the Google Doc. Let me check again and see how many people are connected to it. So the number keeps going up. So there may be some people in your breakout group who are not in there, but that's okay. They can still talk, and hopefully they'll continue to, more people will continue to join that Google Doc. I'll put the link in one more time, and I'll ask if you understand what it is I want you to do in discussing, again, just discussing competence, and then we'll come back and talk about any questions that you might have about it. All right, I have breakout rooms ready to go. So I'm trying to keep track of the time. I think I'll probably put you in breakout groups for 6 minutes. I'll actually set the time to be 6 minutes. So you can watch the time actually if you're interested. And when 6 minutes is up, it'll give you a warning that the breakout groups will close in 1 minute. Let's see. Actually, let me make it 5 minutes. And actually, they'll close in 30 seconds. I'm trying to watch the time here. I want to leave time for discussion as well. All right, here we go. All right, as you come back, please, in the chat, if there were some particularly interesting ways of ensuring students are competent or confident, please enter those in the chat window. Welcome back, everyone. As you come back in the chat window, your reporter from your breakout group, if you would share particularly any new ways that you might have come up with in your group of ensuring that students are competent and confident. Another nice thing about using Google Docs, as you can see, is even when the breakout groups close, the Google Doc stays open. And so you can keep looking at it and working in it. I see it moving around in the background here for me. So I know that some people are still typing, which is great. Right? You don't have to lose your train of thought. Clarity, structure, feedback. And so what would you do to achieve, right? What would you do to achieve those things?
I mean, when I'm clear, if you don't mind, when I'm clear to students what I want from them and clarify things to them that would help them be encouraged and have confidence in themselves. As far as the structure, that it helps the students see how things are related and how they can be explaining, if I give an example in one way and that structure, it continues and complements the other. And for the feedback, and especially if I give feedback and small stake kind of grading that would encourage them, they would take risks and have confidence because they are not going to lose that much of their grade. So they will be encouraged and they will have confidence in themselves. At the same time, by giving small objectives and small things to do, will really build up the confidence and hence the competence as a result.
Good, yeah, right. And right, Amar had mentioned that as well, right? So starting with easy questions so that the students build confidence is useful. Yeah, excellent. Some good ideas there, I see. Excellent. And I'll give you just a little bit more time on the next one. And then the last one actually tends to take even more time. Were there any questions you had about any of the ideas you saw there or anything that came up in conversation? I wanted to take care of any questions that might have come up before moving on.
I have a question. Actually.
Go ahead, Mahmoud.
Yes, the question is that we have only 75 minutes and
right.
How much interaction we can do. And one of the major problem in my classes in business school, I could say, is a background reading. In this kind of interactive learning, you shift a lot of materials that you expect a student come, read all those background material, and then you start your discussion. But the problem is quite often they don't read this material and it becomes a futile exercise. Sometimes then I end up talking more than the students. That's what I don't know what to do with these things.
So right, so what I do, I mean, anything that I need my students to do before class, they take a quiz before class.
Okay.
To show that they're prepared.
Okay.
And that does count in their grade. Okay. So that they know, like, okay, that this pre-class material, they really have to do it because if they don't, they can't properly engage in class. Okay. So I do hold them accountable.
Okay, so you give them a quiz before they come to the class, pre-lecture.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I like the idea of assigning curators among the students. Interesting. Yeah, and that's also nicely relational as well, right? So we'll talk more about that later. That's great. Okay, so let's move to autonomy. So autonomy is actually one of the most difficult things in the college classroom because because professors are used to being in control, and because the students have a very high expectation that the professor is in control of the class. So that's what both of those make it more difficult to allow the students to make choices. So autonomy is about being allowed to make choices, which is sort of given explicit permission, but it's also about the implicit messages that we send to students, that they feel like it's okay to do it. The most common situation where it seems like there's autonomy, but there really isn't, is when a professor asks students if they have any questions. Right? It sounds like they're transferring control to the students to be able to clarify their understanding. Unfortunately, most professors, when they ask if there are any questions, they don't wait more than a second. And so students don't have time to think and formulate a question and ask it before the instructor will move on. And then the students receive the message that you don't really want them to ask any questions, so they stop asking. So the questions to focus on here are, how do you let your students make choices? And how do you let students have some kind of control over what happens in the classroom even? And then finally, like the example I just gave, right, things to stop doing would be ways that you communicate that the students are not in control. And so as with competence, there are a few areas to consider: how to be flexible, how to provide choices, and then how to be responsive to students. So to take feedback from the students, which gives them some kind of control over the direction of things. So again, I'll give you just a little bit more time in this one. It tends to be one that a lot of professors have a hard time with this one. The breakout groups will be for 7 minutes with a 1 minute warning. And let me make sure that, yep, everyone is still in breakout groups, I think. Nope, we have a few people who bounced off. So let me put some people into rooms. I don't know if you'll be in the same room you were in before, but everyone's in a room now. So let's go ahead and discuss autonomy now. And it's just below competence in the Google Doc where you were just working. Is everything okay, Seungmin? Hi, Rashad, did you have a question? All right, as you come back, enter your favorite ideas in the chat window, especially anyone who was a reporter from your room. We'll have everyone else back in about a half a minute. Welcome back. As you come back, please share ideas in the chat window. And welcome back. So as you come back, please in the chat window, especially if you are the reporter from your breakout group, please share some ideas in the chat window. I noticed that some of the breakout groups were down to only a couple of people, so I'll readjust those rooms for the next activity. I know it's getting late where you are. Thanks for sticking in there. Any interesting ideas about ways to give students choices, about ways to help students feel like they have autonomy?
Yeah, can I chip in? Because we try to, you make the assignment, participate in the assignment, which we make so that they will feel they have an assignment that they can engage to, they can reply to it, and they feel close. The students make some assignments.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, having the students make some of the assignments. Yes, absolutely.
And in matters that they things that they can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
This came from my partner, not from me, but I have.
Oh, it's a great idea.
I have elected myself to be a reporter.
Well, thank you. Yeah, use of learner-generated content, excellent. Yeah.
We can ask them to do something, rehearse it before they come, like the day before, a week before, and they come and present it, so that maybe they will make them more autonomous.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Some more good ideas in the chat window. Yep. Yep. Right, giving students starting students off on a problem, but then letting them figure out directions to finish it. Yeah. Yeah. Good options. All right. So, so the last part is about relatedness. So, and this one is even more complex because there are different kinds of connections that, and all of them are important. So, relatedness can be established by making connections to other people, but those other people can be other students, their peers. It can be the instructor, and it can be society in a big sense. So some ways of thinking about that are like learning from and teaching others, but also knowing how the work affects others. And those others could be a client, right? But again, it could be society in a bigger sense. And so there's some extra questions here, right, to think about. So how do your students connect with each other? How do you connect with your students, right? And I'm well aware that different professors have very different preferences for how they connect with their students, and that's absolutely fine. I'm certainly not encouraging you to do something that makes you feel uncomfortable in the classroom. But then thinking about how you help students make connections to engineering practice, and the past year, a lot of people discovered that in the environment of teaching online, that they could give students tours of facilities that the students would never be able to enter in person for either security reasons or safety reasons. And so it really, the environment online really made people start to rethink ways of bringing the engineering world into the classroom. And I think that will be a change for the better in the future, even for in-person teaching. And then that last question, right? How do you connect what you're teaching to society? And so I'm going to make the breakout groups even longer because this always generates a lot of discussion. And we'll have some time to discuss when you get back. Let's see. Trying to watch the time. Yeah. So I'll put you in the rooms for 8 minutes, just a little bit longer than before. And I'll recreate those rooms one more time to make sure that every room has at least 3 people in it. I think we're good. All right. Here we go. Welcome back. As you come back, please in the chat window again, put any ideas about how to make those connections of relatedness. We'll have everyone else back in about half a minute. All right, we should have everybody back now. And we have just a little bit of time. So in the chat window again, ideas for how to promote relatedness to improve motivation. Calling students by their names is great. It's a great way. My record personally is I learned 360 students' names in a single term. That was in 3 classes of 120. It was hard. I had to make maps of the classroom with the students' pictures and their names, and I had to practice. But the good news is I would practice in my head every time that the students were working on activities as a team. So while they were working, I could focus on learning their names. It worked very well. I was able to learn their names in about 2 weeks. I had their names down, but it was a lot of work to do it though. But it's worth it to the students though. Other ideas? I know it's late, especially for you. Oh yeah, right. Project-based work based on real life problems. Inviting alumni is a great way. And again, thinking about class as being a more hybrid model has made that more accessible than ever, right? During the pandemic, I know, while people were teaching exclusively virtually, people had, alumni and professionals join their classrooms who could never have attended in person. And so that's absolutely a benefit that is going to come out of this. Some good ideas showing up there. Again, I'm mindful of the time. So you have 2 documents that will help you think about how to use the ideas from the workshop in your own teaching, right? One is the workshop from the first, or the worksheet from the first half is your own document that you downloaded to your computer. And so I'd encourage you to look back at that. And then as soon as we're done here, I will send that Google Doc to Sanala to share with everyone who attended the workshop. And so I think you can benefit from the ideas that other groups had if you take the time to just look through that document. So it's 3:30 my time, 10:30 your time. I know it's late, and I appreciate you all sticking around the whole time. I hope you found this helpful, and I'll watch if Dr. Saeed has any follow-up questions. I'll turn the floor over to Dr. Saeed.
Well, thank you. Thanks a lot, Matthew. It was great. And I would like to just also add my appreciation for the participant for sticking up to this time. And hopefully we'll see them tomorrow in other data activities. Thanks a lot, Matthew. It's great to see you again and to talk to you again, and we'll keep in touch.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks, everybody.
You have changed quite a lot, Matthew, since 2012.
Well, I thought, since I'm joining you in Saudi Arabia, I thought I would grow a beard.
Oh, that's great.
This is Ahmed Bandea, one of the guys you have seen twice. Yes.
And I started growing a beard before the pandemic, but it became very popular for people to grow them during the pandemic, apparently.
Yes, yeah. You look
Well,
wiser. You
Thanks
look
a lot,
wiser.
Matthew. And thank you, Sanallah. Thanks a lot. You
My
can
pleasure, Doctor.
close now. Yes.
A good evening to both of you, or to all of you.
Okay.